Frankenstein's monster is one of the most popular fictional characters out there. Born through the medium of lightning, and killed in a windmill by an angry mob of torch-wielding villagers. Right? Actually no, because the Frankenstein story you think you know has almost nothing to do with Mary Shelley's original novel, which features none of the first scenes that come to mind when you think Frankenstein. Even the monster's appearance, with the iconic green skin and neck bolts, is completely different from the source material. And while this image of Frankenstein may be the most popular, it's actually the result of derivative works building upon other derivative works rather than the original book. As such, Frankenstein's monster is not only one of the most popular, but also one of the most misrepresented characters in all of fiction, so much so that the underlying message of Shelley's novel has been almost entirely lost through the various reinterpretations, although it's right in our faces in the story's original title. The 1818 novel is actually titled Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, and the subtitle is an outstanding summary of the book's original themes. While Dr. Victor Frankenstein is often considered the embodiment of the mad scientist trope, his ambitions were really far less malevolent. Just like Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to mankind, Victor Frankenstein was a young student of natural philosophy, looking to conquer death itself for the sake of humanity. But just like with Prometheus, stealing godly power, be it the power of fire or the power of life, doesn't usually go unpunished. Dr. Frankenstein doesn't maniacally shout "It's alive" when the monster first opens its eyes. Instead, he immediately regrets achieving his goal. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. The iconic "It's alive" has become one of the most famous lines in cinema because it was written for the 1931 Universal Frankenstein movie specifically with that goal in mind, which is also why calling Clive's Dr. Frankenstein turns the character into the mad scientist we know today. We touched upon the monster's appearance evolving through the years, with the most popular attributes being its green skin, white forehead, and bolts sticking out of its neck. But this image is once again almost entirely based on Boris Karloff's performance from the Universal 1931 movie. Shelley's original monster was not scary because it was monstrous, but because it was almost human, but somehow off to an uncanny level. His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of pearly whiteness. But this luxuriance is only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, his shriveled complexion, and straight black lips. The now cartoonish look from the 1931 movie was once again more interesting to audiences worldwide, quickly turning into a Halloween icon and the foundation for the modern adaptations we imagine when we hear the name Frankenstein. Were these changes executed well for the big screen? Absolutely, as otherwise we probably wouldn't be discussing it today. However, the monster's appearance is not the only thing about it that changed over the years. Most people remember the creature to be dumb, almost brainless, and closer to a zombie than a human being. Right now you may even be picturing it chasing after Scooby-Doo, groaning and with its arms stretched out. And yet, Shelley's original monster is anything but stupid. The creature is articulate, thoughtful, and self-educated. He teaches himself language by secretly observing a peasant family. Later he reads works like Milton's Paradise Lost, and interprets himself through literature, contrasting his condition with that of Adam and Satan. Like Adam, I was created apparently united by no link to another being in existence. But his state was far different from mine in every other aspect. He had come forth from the hands of God a perfect creature, but I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Instead of a zombie, Shelley's original creature is closer to a tragic philosopher who was given too much awareness. Stripping away this intelligence is what flattened one of the novel's most radical elements. A monster who understands what it means to be human, but is powerless to be accepted as one. Now, put yourself in the position of a filmmaker. What would be more appealing to general audiences? A story about what it means to be human and the burden of creation, or a visually entertaining conflict between creator and creation? Most productions made this choice before the monster is even introduced, by presenting Victor Frankenstein as the maniacal doctor we all assume he is. This assumption is what makes later adaptations build on misconceptions. It makes sense for a mad scientist to create some sort of undead monster, and it makes sense for the undead to be monstrous. The moment we as the audience see a white lab coat in a creepy setting, we assume something unnatural is about to happen, and when our assumption proves right, we feel a weird sense of reward. Similarly, it makes sense for a scientist to be gifted intellectually, while the monster is strong physically. Differentiating your characters with contrast is one of the oldest techniques in writing, with the easiest example being all themes of good versus evil. And the same holds true for Dr. Frankenstein's hunchback assistant, whom you may know as either Fritz or Igor. The character was first introduced in the 1823 stage play Presumption or The Fate of Frankenstein to provide some dramatic contrast to the Doctor. The assistant character is completely missing in the original novel, where Victor Frankenstein works alone in secrecy and isolation, with his loneliness heavily playing into his inner conflicts. Still, pairing an idiotic sidekick to a deranged genius somehow just makes sense, allowing the audience to scale and get some perspective on one's intelligence. But the more adaptations lead into this contrast to meet audience expectations, the less room you have left for nuance, unless you make the entire story about said nuance. This is why most adaptations of the story completely ignore the importance of the monster's abandonment, sometimes having it break out or run off on its own. In contrast, when the creature first opens his eyes in the novel, Dr. Victor Frankenstein is the one who runs. And that's what actually kicks off the entire plot. The monster is left without a master or any real form of guidance, having to wander the world by itself, which immediately makes Dr. Frankenstein feel guilty. He knows that he has unleashed a being that society can never accept, and his punishment is delivered through his personal torment on one hand, and the pain inflicted by his creation on the other. Trying not to spoil the plot too much, but after the monster disappears, Victor falls ill from shock, and returns home only after hearing of the death of a loved one, which he soon realizes was the creature's doing. But the blame falls on the family's servant, as the monster once again proves its intelligence by framing her. Despite knowing the truth, Victor stays silent, denying accountability and leaving the innocent servant to be executed while still consuming himself with guilt. The tortures of the accused did not equal mine. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom. This hypocrisy defines Victor Frankenstein throughout the novel. He could have saved the servant, but justified his silence by insisting his own suffering was worse than hers. Eventually, Victor encounters his creation face to face, who instead of being a mute beast, speaks and shows himself being deeply wounded. The monster recounts his life since his creation, how he hid near a peasant family, learning language by observing them. He describes reading Paradise Lost, struggling to understand his own existence. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel. This allusion is what depicts the monster's own tragedy. He desires a place to belong, but his appearance condemns him to solidarity, no matter how gentle or intelligent he proves to be, all by Frankenstein's doing. Being the intelligent creature he proved to be, the monster presents Victor with a solution, demanding only one thing of him: a female companion, someone like him to share existence with. In return, he promises to disappear into the wilderness, never to harm humanity again. Victor reluctantly agrees to create a second being, but halfway to the creation of the female monster, he destroys her, feeling conflicted at the idea of what he calls a race of devils. Little did he know, the original monster was watching through the window, and swears vengeance. After getting said revenge by murdering Victor's wife, the latter dedicates himself to hunting the monster. He chases him across Europe and into the frozen Arctic wastes, where he is eventually rescued near death. Victor tells his story to his rescuer, warning him of the dangers of ambition. Seek happiness in tranquility and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparently innocent one distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries. But Dr. Frankenstein never truly repents, as in his extended dialogue, he still frames himself as a victim of his creation, even as he finally admits some level of responsibility. Victor Frankenstein eventually dies despite being rescued, and the monster appears once again as the story slowly comes to an end. Surprisingly, the monster mourns over Victor's body and announces his plan to build a funeral pyre and burn himself, feeling responsible for his creator's death. This is the only hint to the monster's weakness to fire, which later adaptations frequently attribute to the torch-wielding villagers that never actually show up in the original story. So, instead of being a linear conflict between two opposites, man and beast, strength versus mind, creator against creation, Frankenstein and his monster prove to be almost equal, with the monster being the one taking accountability for his creator's demise, showing more humanity than Victor Frankenstein ever could. And now you know that the story of Frankenstein's monster is not about a mindless zombie terrorizing a village, but about a man committing hubris, only to abandon his creation once he has to face the consequences of his actions. That's why the book is subtitled The Modern Prometheus. Like Prometheus, Victor steals a godly power, the power to give life, but unlike Prometheus, he fails to protect what he has given life to. Many today learn about Frankenstein's monster through later adaptations or appearances in movies like The Addams Family, Hotel Transylvania, or even Scooby-Doo, which build almost exclusively on Universal's 1931 movie. But if you reach the end of this video, you now know that Frankenstein may indeed be the name of the real monster, who isn't a mad scientist as much as an ignorant and irresponsible one.